Before I get into the list, I think it's a good idea to define what I'm going to consider as a gateway game for the sake of this list, and how I differentiated these from those I would consider to be filler games, for which I already have its own great but separate list that should be linked in the corner now. Every filler game can be a gateway game, and you could easily take any game from that other list and use it to introduce some friends to the hobby. However, for the sake of clarity and to ensure that the lists actually feature different games, I consider filler games to be a much lighter, quicker affair, something you'd play at the very start or end of the night, something that won't require much of a teach, feel right at home at a boozy gathering, and provide lots of laughs and memorable moments for the group. Gateway games, then, are the next step up, a little bit more rules, a teach that'll probably need more than a couple of sentences, more components, more table space, and it'll probably require a bit more focus from the players than a regular filler. The game should still be light enough that you could introduce it to your gran or a friend who's never played a board game, but it won't be the kind of game you pull out at 1 AM when the entire group is already 10 pints into the night. You may disagree with this definition, but given how vague and broad the concept of a gateway game can be, I think the list that follows benefits from some stricter guidelines. The honorable mention goes to an absolute classic of a game, a real gem, if you will, Splendor. And there's a reason behind its staying power. The game is super easy to learn, but deep enough that you are engaged and invested throughout, planning ahead, building an engine of sorts, and looking for ways to mess with your opponent's plans. The heavy, clanky chips are also a great selling point, and the whole package is priced at a very accessible price point. The main reason it fell just short of the list is that, well, it looks a bit bland compared to the games that made it into the top 10. The gameplay is great and smooth as butter, but if we're talking about games that are best suited for introducing others to the hobby, I find they need to be a little bit more exciting than good old beige Splendor. And speaking of excitement, the number 10 game on the list is just exploding with it. I'm of course talking about Quacks of Quedlinburg, a bag builder that has you crafting a potion with somewhat less than stable ingredients. The backbuilding aspect of the game is very simple to grasp, and even though there are quite a few different chips with varying abilities, each also comes with a very clear explanation, making it a lot less intimidating for new players. But the real star of the show here is the tense push-your-luck gameplay. Drawing tokens out of your bag can be absolutely exhilarating, especially as you're approaching the explosion threshold, where pulling out and revealing each token feels like one of those scenes in a movie where a character is about to cut the wire on the bomb, holding their breath in anticipation, forehead covered in sweat, hands shaking, unsure of the outcome. It might be a bit low in player interactivity, but I find there is still plenty of memorable moments as players explode in quick succession or succeed in propelling their potion token much further than they thought they would, beating the odds of the bag they've built. Continuing with this idea of excitement in gateway games, the next game on the list brings that in spades, for what could be more exciting than taking control of a giant monster and tearing your way through Tokyo? That's right, the number 9 spot on the list goes to King of Tokyo. What makes King of Tokyo stand out among other gateway games is just how easy it is for players to get invested in it. Picking your giant menace, kitting it out with a plethora of awesome, richly thematic cards and abilities, and duking it out with the other monsters at the table. I find that by the end of the game, the monster has developed into a proper, distinct character, and regardless of whether I win or lose, I'm eager to see how the story plays out. And the gameplay perfectly supports the exciting premise, giving you lots of opportunities to roll amazingly chunky custom dice, throwing some push-your-luck elements in to keep things tense and exciting, and giving players a whole deck of cards to really let you tailor your experience. Games of King of Tokyo are exhilarating, full of countless highs and lows, amazing plays, and lots of banter around the table. It's an experience you're bound to remember after the game is over, and for that reason it has earned its spot on the top 10. My number 8 game is trash, but it's my trash. That probably makes no sense for most people, but I bet those who've read the rulebook for Junkard are all like, Junkard is definitely the lightest game on the list, but that also makes it the easiest to get new players involved in. All you gotta do is stack things on top of each other. But damn if Junkard doesn't manage to make it exciting. The gameplay is naturally tense as you put new shapes on progressively more precarious structures, holding your breath as the masterpiece you've put your heart and soul into sways from one side to another, like me being faced with another choice of saving money or buying yet another game I'll take 3 months to learn and play and inevitably sell in a new and unplayed condition. Come on, we've all been there, right?
Is that like a personal attack or something?
The game is also always kept fresh by a small deck of cards that present different challenges and switch up what a round of Junkard is going to feel like. One round you might have a hand of cards with different shapes, playing them for an opponent to add them to their art piece, and looking for that one piece that will send it all tumbling down. And another round you might be swapping places with other players after each shape, making you think of ways to build a shape just shaky enough that it collapses when someone else touches it. The next game on the list finally answers the question I've been asking myself for years. What if you took Tetris and added some bears to it? Well, you get Baron Park, a brilliant gateway game about, and I completely understand if you didn't realize it straight away since the name is in German, building a bear park. This was one of the first board games I've added to my collection, and now, years later, it's one of the few from that time period that is still on my shelves. I think there are a few reasons for that. For starters, I enjoy the theme. Much like the considerably heavier Ark Nova, Baron Park gives you the satisfaction of planning out what an exclusively bear-only zoo is going to look like, and I think an animal-themed game is always a little easier to introduce to people. The gameplay is also thinky enough to be engaging, while remaining straightforward and without any overly complicated rules. And, kind of obviously, but Baron Park also delivers that satisfaction of actually having built something at the end, giving players a rewarding, though sometimes hilarious experience when like a third of your park is just toilets you had to use to plug up gaps between poorly placed polyominoes. From one polyomino to another, although this time, instead of building a park for bears, you'll be building my city. Or your city. Reiner's city. Anyway, it's a legacy polyomino where over the course of something like 10 games, you will build up and tear down a town, adding more and more elements as the games progress. And that last bit is exactly why I felt like my city needed to be on the list, as the game starts with an incredibly straightforward rule set and progressively trickles in some extra rules at a very comfortable pace, while the exciting new gameplay mechanics keep you engaged throughout the course of the campaign. I played through my city with my partner, who'd usually zone out if the rules explanation is taking too long, but we were both able to get into the game with ease and experience the excitement of wondering what could be inside those envelopes, opening them up, stickering new things on our boards, as well as the drive of playing just one more game to see where it all goes from here. My city may not have a long, complex and evolving narrative like a lot of other legacy games, but it is also much more accessible than any of those titles, both in terms of price and complexity, and is still one of the best gaming experiences I've had with my partner. Including the next game on the list of gateway titles is incredibly predictable, cliché and boring, but there's a reason for its staying power in the hobby, and I don't think this list would have been complete without Ticket to Ride Europe on it. The actual version of Ticket to Ride might vary. You could prefer the original US one or one of the very large myriad of maps available. I personally went with Europe largely because that's where I'm based and I'm most familiar with the cities on that map, though I also like the flexibility and potential for a more chill experience that the stations create. But the fact remains that for the last 20 years, Ticket to Ride has been a permanent staple of the hobby and one of the best gateway games around, and I personally attribute its widespread appeal to two main factors. First of all, it's the realistic setting of the game. Whether it's the US, Europe, Japan, Norway, at this point there are so many Ticket to Rides that there's a very good chance that wherever you are in the world, there's probably a Ticket to Ride with that location in it. And if there isn't, trust me, it's coming. The point I'm getting at is that this makes it that much easier to introduce the game to new players and for those players to get engaged in it because there's already a connection to what you're doing in the game, like trying to build a railway to your hometown or connecting some of your favorite holiday destinations. You don't have to try and get everyone around the table invested in the game. It happens organically before the game has even started. And the other reason, I think, is just the fact that Ticket to Ride has a very satisfying gameplay loop. Sure, all it is collecting cards and playing them to build a railway, but seeing your network grow can be very rewarding, and there's a good amount of tension too as the board begins to fill up and you're competing for some of the more desired routes with other players. And the simplicity of that loop means that not only is it easy for anyone to get involved, new players can still be pretty competitive, which just makes it that much more likely that they'll want to play again than if they had gotten completely hopelessly trashed. Continuing with the theme of building roads, though on a much smaller scale this time, as my number 4 pick goes to Get On Board. It's safe to say that Get On Board wears its inspirations on its sleeve. There's a bit of Ticket to Ride here, some Railroad Ink, and a bunch of other roll and ride stuff that you'll be pretty familiar with. But the way all the different ideas come together makes for an incredibly enjoyable and, dare I say, thematic experience. The core premise of the game is making a bus route, picking up students, businessmen and grannies on your way and dropping them off at the right places to score some victory points. It's easy to draw up what you're supposed to be doing, but there's enough thinking space in planning your route out and adjusting to the different routes that come out that you remain engaged throughout. It is also one of the few flippin' rides to have actually done something to solve the general lack of interactivity these games typically have by adding a shared city board, where if your bus's route overlaps with that of another player, you have created traffic, which will cost you some victory points at the end. Finally, I just absolutely love the look of the game, the pastel colors, the art, the cards that are made to look like bus tickets. It all creates a vibe of this cozy game that would go perfectly with a cup of tea on a rainy afternoon. Next, how about we add some pulse-pounding excitement to this list with a good old racing game, Flam Rou. In Flam Rou, players take on the role of cyclist, which alone is already a pretty intriguing premise that differentiates the game from a lot of the other car-centric race games, and have to win the race by successfully managing exhaustion, picking up the right moments to pedal at full speed or to take it easy, decide when it's best to stick with the pack and when it's time to split and make their play for the winner's podium. The gameplay is very straightforward, almost verging on simplistic, as pretty much all that players have to do is play cards and move the number of spaces indicated on the card. However, it is the thematic additions of slipstreaming and exhaustion that not only keep Flam Rou from growing stale, but push it all the way to number 3 on my list of gateway games. Slipstreaming allows you to move your cyclist one extra space if you finish your move exactly one space behind another player, while exhaustion cards clog up your deck whenever you're at the front of the pack. This means that you're always considering what the other players are going to do, how likely is someone to start pulling away from the pack, and can you put yourself in a situation where you can get some free movement while they suffer the exhaustion cards. It makes Flam Rou such a richly thematic game, as you see in real time how those cyclists that have been putting their legs through the ringer from the get-go start running out of steam, while the ones who have cruised along in a pack at the start suddenly start catching up at breakneck pace. It all culminating in a tense finale as everyone barrels towards the finish line. The number 2 spot goes to one of the newest games on the list, but boy if Cascadia didn't come out swinging right out of the gate with straightforward and buttersmooth gameplay, engaging central puzzle, and the always reliable nature theme. The gameplay is definitely the main draw here. Cascadia is a point salad type game, with a lot of different scoring conditions, and what makes the game fascinating to me is the puzzle of figuring out how to make all of them synergize as best as possible, as quite often these conditions will be pulling you in different directions. Like a card requiring you to have the same type of animals bundled together, while at the same time doing that might break your continuous habitat group. It can be incredibly satisfying to pull off as well. That moment when it all comes together, when you get the exact tile or animal you needed, then suddenly everything you've been building clicks into place, meeting multiple conditions and scoring a whole heap of points is just delicious. And that happens multiple times during the game. Hell, most of the time you'll probably have a few areas like that going at the same time. It's also a pretty zen type game. There's some slight level of messing with other players by taking some tiles they might have been after, but I find that with the amount of different scoring opportunities in the game and the general flexibility of the system, it is unlikely that anyone will be massively inconvenienced by that, which again makes it a very easy game to introduce to family members or friends to just play with a cup of tea without them feeling like you're about to absolutely trash them. And of course, it being about animals doesn't hurt either when introducing the game to grandma. She's probably much more likely to get into a game about creating a nice habitat for some bears and foxes than about stopping Cthulhu or beating on some orcs, unless you have like the most awesome grandma in the world. And then there was one. I was umming and ahhing about which of the games that made it into the top 3 deserved the number 1 place, but I think Azul fits the bill best. It was my first proper gateway game, it has spawned multiple sequels, and has, without a doubt, become an absolute modern classic of a game since its release. The game really has all you could ever want in a gateway game. The nice chunky tiles are an instant selling point, clacking beautifully in that bag, looking absolutely gorgeous and feeling great to play with. The gameplay is simple, yet with enough depth that more experienced players can still get stuck in without leaving the newbies in the dust. The puzzle is interesting to figure out while remaining very reliant on the rest of the players in determining not just which tiles might be available for you to pick up, but also how long the game is likely to run and what you might be able to achieve in that time. It also scales well at all player counts, maintaining the same experience throughout without sacrificing much in terms of player engagement or adding too much downtime between player turns, making it a great game for couples, thruples, or a couple of couples. I've only played one of the sequel games, Summer Pavilion, but honestly, from the little bit of research I've done, to me the original Azul remains the best one. There's something special about the purity of design here, without any of the bells and whistles added on in the later titles. Azul was the first in the series, and to me, it remains the peak of the series.